our DD 101 Lunch and Learn as funnel shaped. Our session today will start at the funnel top, the widest part with the national big perspective of the DD councils. Next week, we will narrow the funnel to the state and local agency connections. In the third and final week, we'll focus on our personal experience as council members. So with that picture in mind of the funnel, we're entering the top of the funnel today. It is my privilege to introduce our presenter for today, Dr. Sheryl Matney. Sheryl is Director of Technical Assistance for the National Association of Councils on Developmental Disabilities. Sheryl intends to give us a national perspective on DD operations. Sheryl, welcome. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dave. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oh, can you enable screen sharing, Gina?
Certainly. I apologize, Sheryl. Let me just get that together here.
Okay. No worries. Thank you guys for joining us today, and thank you for your service to New York State and your citizens with developmental disabilities. It is certainly sometimes a thankless job, but know that people in Washington, D.C. appreciate all of your efforts and your energy and the time commitment that you make in really working towards improving things for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I'm going to go ahead and just do my share screen and, let's see. I really want hang on, technology, it's my friend. I'm sure it's my friend. Hang on. Sorry, guys.
We see a PowerPoint, Sheryl.
You do, but it's probably it is a PowerPoint. I just need it to go to my full version.
Okay.
And I'm just struggling trying to get it to
Sheryl, while you're working on that, I did want to just mention one other thing I forgot to mention, which is we do have a satisfaction survey. I'll be putting a link in the chat box during the Q&A session. So if you could hang around and just click on that link and answer a few of our survey questions. So thank you.
Oh, perfect. Okay, now that I've clickety-clacked and I think I have things working, today, as Dave mentioned, we are going to talk about the national perspective on DD Council program operations. So I did a quick little, this sort of looks like an org chart, but basically what I wanted to convey here is we're going to talk about council connections in a couple of buckets. And so you'll see the red squares here are going to take up some information on your national connections. And so we'll talk a little bit about your connections with the federal government, and then we'll talk about your connections with some national programs, two in particular, your national membership organization and technical assistance. And then you'll see the blue squares, and these are your state connections, the things that are pretty important for you guys as council members and staff to really know about. And you'll see a few gray squares down at the bottom, and that is specific to the New York State DD Council. So this is just a real quick thing to let you know how we're going to move through the information. So we'll get started with our federal connections. You guys know that there is a federal law that created and authorized the DD Council program. Now, this law also authorized other programs for people with developmental disabilities. We have university centers that are funded programs. We have protection and advocacy programs, which is another funded program, and then the DD Council program. Also inside this big old federal law are the projects of national significance, which those are also funded. They're different than a program like ours. And then we have some unfunded titles in the DD Act. But for your purposes, you're looking at Title B as in boy, and it really sets forth and authorizes DD council programs. Now, the name of the federal law is pretty long, and I've written it all out here. It is formally called the Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act of 2000, more commonly called the DD Act. Now, you know, we say, why 2000? I thought we've been around for 50 years. Yes, we have. We have. But the most recent authorized bill is of 2000. So now your question has to be, 23 years ago is not recent, Sheryl. Come on, bring us forward. Well, it is the most recent year that the law was reauthorized. And so oftentimes people ask us, well, then if it hasn't been reauthorized, is it still a law? Yes, it is. And it is because of the next item, federal funding. Congress continues to appropriate and approve federal funding for the programs in the DD Act that was most recently reauthorized in 2000. That makes it a current law. So all of the rules and regulations that are and all of the requirements in the DD Act remain current because they're funded. So every year Congress does put in, the president puts in a budget item for DD councils that the administration for community living also weighs in on what that number would be. And then Congress takes up funding for your council inside their standard appropriation process. So every single year this happens. And I think it's important to note that over all of these years, councils have continued to receive federal funding and support from Congress. And I think that speaks to the important work you guys do and the impact that you make on people's lives. And relatively speaking, it's a small effort. I mean, we talk about, you know, it's mind-boggling to think about trillions of dollars in a budget. And overall, councils get about $80 million a year for all of the council programs across the states and territories. So when you think about that, the impact of the decisions you make, the innovative ideas that you come up with and put into action, it's pretty impressive. So don't forget to celebrate those successes along the way. The other thing that you guys really want to wrap your heads around, and most council members do like to know, what is our place in federal government? What does it look like? What does it mean? Well, so you guys are kind of overseeing, you have oversight, the people who administer your funding and your programmatic kind of rules is within an agency called the Administration for Community Living. Now, it is one of the 11 agencies within the larger federal agency of the Department of Health and Human Services. So the Administration for Community Living has a number of programs in it, primarily and just easily to understand, it's things like aging programs, independent living programs, the DD programs being the council, the protection and advocacy, university centers. There's some research, disability research programs in the agency. So it's not just the councils and the people that you know. This is a large agency. But the way they organize themselves is through offices. And so within ACL, which is what Administration for Community Living is often called, they provide a lot of oversight and accountability to DD councils. There is an administration on disability, but within that administration, then there's an office of intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that is where you all are really accountable to. So your staff, you have a fantastic DD Council program staff. They have to fill out annual reports. They fill out a number of things like state plan updates, performance reports, financial reports. All of this is overseen by a program specialist that is assigned to New York State DD Council. Fortunately, you have the program specialist who grew up in New York. So she loves reading about what's going on in her home state and continues to be impressed by the amount of work and all of the impacts you guys make. There's also financial oversight. And so Jesse is your financial guru, and he gets a lot of regulations and all sorts of things coming down through the federal agency. The council must pay attention to all of that. You guys do pay attention to that, and I want to thank you for having a competent staff who does that. But you're not on your own. The state also has rules, regulations, and laws. You cannot set those aside. The council must also factor in what is acceptable and legal in the state of New York, as well as what is expected, acceptable, and within regulatory guidelines at the federal level. So all of this to say, it is orchestrated, it is an organized process, but there are layers here, and councils, as much latitude as you get to make decisions about your work, to really make decisions about investing your federal funds in different projects, you do have a responsibility and accountability for following the rules in your state and what is acceptable within your grant award. Okay, so now let's turn our attention to your national kind of organizations that you interface with on a regular basis. You do have a membership-based national association for councils on developmental disabilities, and that is often referred to as NACDD. And our world, we love an acronym more than anybody else in the world, but it is called the National Association of Councils on Developmental Disabilities. Well, that's a lot. That's a mouthful. So NACDD, you guys pay a membership fee annually to be a member in good standing, and New York is a member in good standing of the association. And each council only gets one vote on association business. I think the most important thing for you guys is to know that NACDD is not like they don't have authority over your council. They don't have authority over your decisions or the work you take up. It does not operate like, for example, a national ARC where councils are chapters. You guys are the authority and the decision makers for your council. People belong to NACDD because NACDD is the organization that can represent the council network as one voice. And so, and they also can lobby yes, I said the L word, lobby Congress for council funding when you cannot. You have restrictions on making an ask of a federal official for funding. NACDD has registered lobbyists. They meet the threshold of the IRS regulations on lobbying for a 501c3 organization, and they can make the ask. They can go to your senators and your representatives and say, the New York State DD Council does amazing work. Let me tell you why you need to vote yes to keep their money going. and whereas Vicki and Dave and you guys can say, let me tell you about the impacts we've made with the funding that has been provided. You can't make an ask, but you can sure shout your stuff from the rooftop. So the other benefit of NACDD is that they do represent councils on national coalitions, on task forces, interface with federal agencies like FEMA, which is Federal Emergency Management. Well, I probably butchered that pretty good. The White House, Centers for Medicaid Services. And so a lot of times, and your council is very active with NACDD and with TA as well. And so we do want to hear and involve people from councils in helping share that message, especially with folks like the Office of Management and Budget, who always want to know, help us understand what councils do so that we can, really be able to be positioned to move this appropriation ask forward. NACDD also operates additional grants and contracts. So you may hear about other initiatives the National Association takes up, like aging and disability work, or they have a consumer product safety grant right now, working through the Consumer Product Safety Commission and involving people with disabilities and testing products. So lots of diverse things happen at the national level. But one of the things that I know that the association really does try to do is involve members in the work and to be part of the work. So not speaking for you, rather asking you guys to come with the association and help speak again with one voice. And then you've got technical assistance, which is another national program. And that is where you're seeing my interface here. The federal law, the DD Act, requires a technical assistance program be provided at no cost to any DD council. That is part of the services when Congress appropriates money for DD councils. Currently $610,000 comes out of that. I don't get that money, okay? So please don't think I get $600,000 a year. But $600,000 is pulled out to provide technical assistance to all DD councils. And it's the providers are selected through a competitive process. It just so happens that NACDD is the contractor for technical assistance. NACDD did compete and was awarded a 5-year contract. So that's who you get us through 2026 at this point. And membership in a national association is not required to receive technical assistance. So what we do is work directly with the oversight body of the Office of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, and we work in coordination with them and determine where the federal government sees improvements need to be made by DD councils, or where some extra education needs to come in. So it is very much a collaborative partnership on technical assistance. And we aim to, be very responsive to what your council needs. I will say, give you a quick example. Dave helped us. He was one of our subject matter experts for educating chair people. We had a group of chairs from around the country and territories, and really wanted to know what are the important things that chair people need to know about and what skills do they need to have. And so we're able to really tap the expertise of people like Dave who actually do the job and work through it. Vicki has been on my advisory committee before for the technical assistance arm here. The administration is very council forward. So we don't do anything unless we know that this is something that council people have given a nod of approval on, and really want to be very responsive. So the same thing goes for council members. If you guys find that you need, something from National Technical Assistance, there's a way to work through that. We want to hear from you. You go through your chair, and then Dave can bring it up, and then we can poll other people and say, is this more than New York? Is this something that other people need? Most of the time, the answer is yes. It's just somebody hasn't said it out loud. Okay, now let's turn our attention to state government connections. So the important thing here is that your state had to authorize the DD Council program to exist. It's not a gift, you guys. It's kind of like you invited us to the party, so we're going to have a DD Council program in New York State. You guys are authorized through state law, which is what state statute means. The DD Act is a very interesting law where there is a strong partnership here between state and federal. The DD Act authorizes the governor to appoint council members, and also authorizes the governor to appoint what is called a designated state agency, which means some entity to provide support to the council. And so it was important that that entity be in state government. So for you guys in New York State, your designated state agency is the Office of People with Developmental Disabilities. And you are what the administration refers to as administratively attached, meaning they don't tell you what decisions to make. They don't tell you what you will and will not do. But remembering, we do legal things, right? So they can tell you if you're doing something illegal, but you're not doing that. So administratively attached, which means the DSA responsibilities are primarily financial. They do things like receive your money. They account for your money. They pay your bills. They make sure that the way you're using the money is appropriate for the source of the money, and that you are following the rules inside the state of New York for using public money. And they'll fill out your financial reports, if that's the way it works in New York State. They also are required to provide the non-federal share. They also do things like help Vicki get the assurances signed that have to be submitted with your state plan. Also, if Vicki and the council, you guys decide you need a memorandum of understanding with your DSA, that is something that they must enter into. So it's really to support the council. DSAs can do other things as well. They can be a grantee for the council. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as it's no greater than 20 per, they have some rules. Always a rule attached to everything. So, you could give a grant to Office of I can't ever get that, OPWDD.
That's it.
You could give a grant to OPWDD, but it couldn't be greater than 20% of your annual award. Well, you guys get a lot of money, so that would be a big number. I don't think that's something you have to worry about. But it's really about positioning yourselves. You don't do what anybody tells you to do. The council really is designed to be the authority. You guys get to make your own decisions. So let's look at that. Council authority. The council is self-governing. All that means is you get to determine how you work. Nobody tells you that. Even the federal government cannot tell you how you will conduct your business. As long as the purpose and the overall expectations of what the program is designed to do is happening, you can operate any way you want. Most of the time, councils have bylaws. Sometimes councils have a committee structure. Sometimes councils have, task forces or work groups that include non-council members. The federal government cannot say that's right or wrong as long as the fundamental aspect of the program is being met. And so we have, for example, we have one council who does not have bylaws because the state law says they can't. Okay, so that's one. There are 56 different ways, because there are 56 councils. There are 56 different ways councils are organized and structured. But there are some basics. The one basic is members are public officials. And when we think about what a public official is, and a lot of times council members don't think of themselves as a public official, but you were appointed by the governor of the state. And so that meets the test. A public official is usually appointed by an elected member of the government. You also make decisions about the use of public money. So your federal funds, you're making decisions about that with the intent to impact citizens. So that's the citizens of the state of New York. And you're fulfilling specific functions of a public program. So you meet the test as for being a public official. And so we take a lot of care and thought into deliberations when you want to discuss initiatives and really work through issues affecting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. You're doing so for the greater good of New York State. And so as a public official, that's why we don't have conversations that are private. We're open. We're having those conversations with people. If people from the public want to hear what you're talking about, that's an open public meeting, because you are dealing in a publicly funded program to impact members of the public. So as you guys deliberate your work and you think about what you have coming up and what your goals are in your state plan and how you're going to achieve and impact people with DD, you're providing leadership to the state. So again, we thank you for your leadership. Lived experiences are key inside, and that's the beauty of council. 60% of your council are people who have a lived experience, either as an individual with DD or a family member or a parent of a child. And then we have the complementary council members, the 40% of the side of state agencies, people who work inside the systems designed to support people and their needs. So it's a great setup in that we all have equal status on a DD council. A commissioner of an agency has no greater status than a parent or, of a child or an adult. Everybody is the same, bringing all of their experiences together so that the council then can implement things that can really impact either systems, make systems better, systems of support or services or other assistance better, to help communities welcome and make services at the community level more inclusive, to help people live in the community. So we think about all of our advocacy work. A lot of energy goes into that, but it's necessary because we have to be our best advocates for people that we want to make sure have the same status as everybody else. So that is, in a nutshell, how you're connected nationally to the federal government, national organizations, state, and then just a little bit about what the feds expect in the way of your authority, being able to make those decisions. Dave?
Thank you, Sheryl. I think we'll go ahead and take questions now. If there are some in the chat, Gina, we would appreciate if you read them. If you have a question, you can also raise your hand. You don't have to necessarily send it through the chat. So questions, please.
Can I ask one? I'll ask the first question, if you don't mind, David and Sheryl. So Sheryl, can you talk a little bit about what you see as the national policy priorities of ACL? As you know, I mean, obviously you talked about, we have a state plan that broadly outlines our strategic plan for the 5 years, but if you could just give our council members and state agency reps and everyone else on this call today, some of, your thoughts about other, areas that we really should be possibly, paying particular attention to.
I think, thanks for that question, Vicki. I think the biggest priority right now is home and community-based services. And you guys may read a lot about these settings rule issues, and the commissioner of the Administration on Disabilities is acutely interested in pushing this agenda forward. She has been visiting states. She has spent a lot of time trying to really understand, listening, to people in the community. But what they're finding is that advocacy can always be improved. And so I think you guys as a council are going to start really hearing a lot more of where you need to put some pressure on people who are, implementing the system so that people can live in the community. We do know that wrapped up in this is really our direct support professional, to be frank, crisis around the country, where we're not, people never have enough. Well, that was true before the pandemic, and it hasn't improved post-pandemic. And so I think that, the feds are really looking to work with the Department of Labor, trying to make some systemic policy changes there, because we know that this work oftentimes is not compensated at a rate that's attractive, is not, it's just, we're just find some inequities there. I do think that she wants really the advocacy to be super relevant. We need to get on the same page with messaging. What do we need to message as a national network of councils? And then we want to really give people some ideas about how to mobilize those messages and the advocacy so that we can make a collective push. We do see the administration talking a lot about social determinants of health. And so that is another area that the feds spend some time. They have to be kind of careful though, because with DD councils, you guys are responding to the specific needs of citizens in New York. That may look very different from the specific needs of citizens in Guam. So they take very broad brushstrokes because they can't tell you that you have to work in X, Y, and Z. The federal government, there's a piece in the DD Act that says the federal government cannot dictate or tell you how or what. So, but most of these things like, you know, access to health care, employment, living in the community, they can tell you that you can't be pro-institution. I mean, you know, because come on, the whole DD Act is about community living. So they, you know, in that sense, that's just such a wide berth. But I think that's where right now, a lot of interagency work, a lot of trying to figure out what the collaborative strategies are, and then having the national network, all councils kind of push together so that we can see some sustained advocacy and lead to sustained change.
Thanks, Sheryl.
Other questions?
I know you guys probably, I know I just glossed over your money. Anybody ever curious about how do you get the amount you get?
Yeah, I'm curious about that. Sheryl, can you explain the funding formula in a very simplistic way for me?
I can. It's three things. It's four things. It's three big things. So your money is, you're a formula grant program, which just means, and you're a mandatory, this is even better, you're a mandatory grant program, meaning you don't make an application, you don't compete for your money. Your program, if you put in a 5-year plan and it meets the requirements, you're going to receive the money. It's based on population, which is whatever the U.S. Census Bureau says your population is. It's also based on need. Now, don't let your hair catch on fire when I say this. This need is based on a 1.58% DD prevalence rate. And you're going to say, that is ridiculous. We have more than 1.58% of our population has developmental disabilities. Correct. Correct. But that is what is approved right now. And then it's based on financial need in the state. And that is split between two factors. One is the number of people living in poverty and the unemployment rate. So it's a pretty simple formula. There's only 4 things that are taken into account. And every year, you know, that's the way it goes. I don't know, you know, as you start hearing in New York, I always hear on the news, people are leaving New York State. So does that mean your census is going up or down? And does it impact the amount of money you get? Probably not significant, you know, honestly. But that is what the formula is based on. Is there enough money to do what you want to do? Never, ever is there enough money. You could get $20 more million and you'd say, but we need more. But you know, that is the way the formula goes. And so you are considered a larger allotment council because how much do you get, Vicki? 4 million?
About 4.5 million it ranges, but between
Okay.
4.2 and 4.5 million.
That's a great, you know, you think about over 5 years, there you do have $20 million to implement your state plans. So we see you guys doing some pretty amazing things, and we appreciate you being very willing to share your stories and your impacts and to help us out and serve on our committees and all sorts of things that we have going on.
No,
Dave?
we're grateful. I'm sorry, I'll turn it back here. I'm just gonna say
mhm.
grateful for the amount of money that we receive, because just to give other people some perspective, there are councils that are the small allotment that I don't know if it's the smallest amount they get. Is it it's under 100,000, right, Cheryl? I mean, there are some
Well,
councils that
the
literally have
territories
one-
get,
yeah, they have one staff
yeah,
person.
yeah, territories get about $270,000 minimum allotment, like the very small states like Wyoming or Montana, they get about 525,000. So
Well, I thought there was some that got under 100. I must be wrong,
nah,
but
nah.
no. Okay, that's very
nah.
okay. Phew, that was like, but we are still very fortunate to be one of the larger allotments.
Yeah, yeah, you are. And you know, and it just, you think about your state's very diverse, but you do have a very large population in your state and a very diverse geographical state. So you have big, huge urban areas, and then you have very remote areas as well. So one could argue that you guys do need those resources because you're having to really cover a pretty big area with a diverse population.
Absolutely. All right, Dave, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Vicki. So Sheryl, I'm particularly interested in this DSA administratively attached relationship. And what I'm curious about, we're connected through OPWDD. Do other states make that connection differently from us? In other words, are they attached to another kind of agency, or is it always an OPWDD kind of agency?
It is not. Thanks for that question. So you guys are allowed to be connected to an agency that pays for or provides services to people with developmental disabilities because the governor assigned that agency before 1994.
Yeah.
So if New York today said, we want a different DSA, you would have to find an agency that does not pay for or provide services to people with developmental disabilities. So that is why you would see, and we have a document on our website that is all about, it shows you every DSA placement in the country and territories. So you'll see Wyoming is attached to the Attorney General's office. Yikes. Okay, so you can imagine their audit process. We have councils that are attached to the economic development, the business stuff. We have a council that's attached to the governor's office. That is okay, as long as the council can fulfill their role and that the DSA does not get in the way of the council's ability to be an independent advocate for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So there's a lot of different agencies out there, Dave. But the reason you get these, you kind of look at it and scratch your head and say, why would that be the council's DSA? It's because they restructured state government. and most likely had to assign a DSA after the grandfather clause, which ended in 94. And so that means you can't have an agency that's in conflict. What the Congress intended with that was they did not want the council having there be an opportunity for an agency to get in the way of the council being an independent advocate for people with DD. And sometimes when you're in a service providing agency, the council's agenda and the agency's agenda compete with each other. They're not complementary, because advocates may want to see a big change on something that isn't what a state agency would like to see. And it doesn't make it right or wrong. It just means that it's, the likelihood of that conflict occurring would be diminished. So that's what the intent was back in the day.
Follow-up question. Is it done differently with the territories due to their different nature, I suppose?
Nope, they are very much the same. American, for example, Guam is in the office of the governor. And that is but the executive director is also a cabinet member of the governor. Well, that's probably the only one in all of the councils that operates that way. Other councils, they are all have been grandfathered in, so they are connected to service providing agencies. Most of the time, something like a Department of Human Services, which takes into account health and welfare, that kind of thing.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
I don't see anything in the chat here, but Sheryl, I have a question, just speaking to what you and Vicki were talking about as far as the work that's done in New York and sharing stories and talking about what we're doing. So I know that, the DDPC, we're doing our best to share our work, tell people about our work, share our stories. And I know that this is happening across the country and other DD councils. So what would you say is the best forum for that? If somebody just wanted to find out what's happening in other DD councils, where would be somewhere somebody could kind of check that out and see what's happening? And I know there's a lot of sharing of this information. So,
this is one of the hardest questions known to man. So I can tell you what OIDD, the people who do through technical assistance. So this was a big item that came up in the 5-year contract, is we must now provide an avenue for collecting your stories, your projects and your stories, and house them on the itachelp.org website. And you guys have been great. I think Kim Berg, I know she's tired of hearing me, like, give me a story, bugging you to death for a story. But that is where councils can push forward their promising practices, their emerging practices, things that are pretty successful that other councils may want to replicate. The other thing is, we now need to really figure out, you guys do some pretty amazing annual reports across the board. In fact, I just pulled reports for the feds yesterday. And one of the things that we don't do a good job of is really let people know. We don't attach it anywhere like on, here's a laundry list of council's annual reports. That may be something that we can do so that you have a one-stop place to be able to say, I really want to see what's happening in Wisconsin on that. Let me just click over there and see what's going on. It has been very difficult, and I know this is going to be controversial probably, but not all councils are achieving the results that you guys achieve on a regular basis. Okay. So with 56 different councils, there's 56 different levels of effectiveness. And I think Vicki mentioned there are a couple of councils that only have one staff. And so a lot of the work is done through grantees or, interagency agreements, that kind of thing. But it also speaks to the amount of funding. So if you only get $250,000 a year, are your results going to be as great as a $4 million council? So there, people get a little shy. They're like, well, I'm not as good as New York. Well, you're not supposed to be. You need to be as good as what your state or territory is. What is it that you've done? It's really part of the difficulty here is really helping people see their successes and share their successes for themselves in what they're working with, appropriation size. You can imagine Montana, huge state, very small population of people with IDD. And so trying to, make an impact in that state would look very different than California, even though California has remote areas as well. But it's a very interesting dilemma for councils at this time. But the feds are not going to take their foot off the gas. The only way we can help people understand what councils do is through the story. And so if you guys do a great job at telling the story, it really is about saying, and I know I bugged Kim to death over your guardianship initiative because we've used your project and story a couple of times in TA to say, yeah, this was on or supported decision making versus guardianship, giving people additional options. And so what did this mean for one person? That's the story. It meant that they then could be taken seriously and direct their own lives with support. OMB people, Office of Management and Budget, the people who count the beans, they go, oh, I think I know what that means now because I read this story about Bill or Bob. That's really where councils need to, doesn't have to be a flowery, fantastic. It just needs to just be, before supported decision making, somebody told me what was going to happen to me every day. Now I get to help decide what happens to me every day. And there's like 300 more people like me in my state. So that's the impact. It's that simple, but people who fund our programs understand that. So we don't need to make it more complicated than it needs to be. But at this point, Gina, I tell you what I did. I went to everybody's website. Now that's time consuming. And I found out real quick. It took me like 4 hours to find 22 things. That's not, people don't have that kind of time. So now I'm getting ready to go to OIDD and saying, can I link to their website? Can I link and get this in a place where everybody can see it?
Yes, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I think Colleen Scott has a question.
Hi, sorry, I realize we're running close to time and I don't want to take us backwards, but I just had a question about, you kind of glossed over it, I think, earlier when you were saying that the state agency that the council is connected to has the match requirement. So my question is, that's a voluntary, I mean, it's not voluntary that there is a match requirement, but it would be voluntary on a part of an agency to accept the responsibility of being tied to a DD council, right? Because there is a match requirement, or am I not understanding correctly?
No, but I would, if the governor assigned, so the governor appoints the designated state agency. With that appointment comes the requirement that the match be provided. That's the responsibility of the DSA. In reality, though, and let's go reality, is that your grantees also must bring match to the table because there's some additional rules inside the DD Act. And so between your grantees and the support that your designated state agency provides the council, usually it is not a problem because the designated state agency can actually bill the council for $50,000 in reimbursement every year. You know good and well they're giving way more money to processing payroll, running, processing your contracts, your human resources, legal services. I mean, there are so many things that a state agency does to support a council, and those are in kind. It doesn't have to be cash, just in kind support, that the non-federal share is usually met so quickly that it's never a problem. But to answer your question, it isn't voluntary. If they're appointed the DSA, they must, because the law says they shall provide the. And so a lot of times it's just an agreement though with the council. The designated state agency is they already have skin in the game, meaning they're going to support the council with a human resource, payroll, other accounting stuff, legal services, contracting. And that usually, there's not an amount on that. The DD Act doesn't say you have to give X percent. It says the state shall have a reasonable financial participation. And there is no regulation or definition of reasonable. So when the law is silent, that leaves it to the state.
Thank you, Sheryl. And I would like to thank Sheryl for an excellent presentation today. I have 20 more questions, but we'll take that up privately in email. So, thank you so much.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank
let
you,
me
Cheryl.
know.
This has been wonderful. Thank you. And thank
Good.
you all for participating.
And I'd like to thank Gina for coordinating and
for
facilitating
coordinating.
the session as well.
Yep.
Thank you, Gina.
Thanks.
And
And we have it on our website. We'll have it available, not our website, but we'll have the recording available, right, Gene, if anybody needs it, or we'll also let other members that weren't able to join today have access to that recording. So very informative as always, Sheryl. Thank you.
Okay, thank
and
you.
thank you all. Thank you
Thank
all
you.
for joining us today.
Have a great day.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.